Hello, good morning and welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, there's more Mo Salah magic. The Liverpool forward scores twice in the 3-1 victory over Arsenal at Anfield. Anyone for penalties, Marcus Rashford. He hits the post as Manchester United lose at home to Crystal Palace. And Frank Lampard, he's finally off the mark as Chelsea manager. Tammy Abraham scores twice. Mason Mount gets the other in a 3-2 victory at Norwich. Well, singing like canaries with us this morning, Andy Dunn is the chief sports writer with The Mirror. Jeremy Wilson is chief sports reporter at The Telegraph, and Mark Ogden is senior football writer with ESPN. Morning, fellas. Glad you could join us, and particularly to you, Andy, because I know you drove pretty much through the night to be with us because you're at Liverpool yesterday, which we'll get on to in a moment. Don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at the papers then, many of them, of course, reflecting on Mo Salah's performance, his magical performance last night at Anfield. Another sparkling show, scores twice as Salah crushes Arsenal. That's the back page of the Mail on Sunday's story here as well. Javi Gracia could face the axe as Watford stay pointless. They lost at home to West Ham yesterday. It's 3 defeats in a row in the Premier League for Watford. Also lost, of course, their last game of last season, 6-0 against Manchester City in the FA Cup final. Andy's piece this morning from Liverpool last night, Salah, the smiling assassin, who was always going to have the last laugh on David Luiz. Andy waxing lyrical about Salah's performance. We're coming straight on to that this morning. We'll get on to this in part 2 of today's programme. Sickening. This is the abuse directed on social media at Marcus Rashford after he hit the post yesterday at Old Trafford. Manchester United losing at home to Palace. It's also made the front page of the Sunday Times. This follows on, of course, from the abuse directed at Paul Pogba after his penalty against Wolves earlier in the week. Some better news at Manchester United for fans who want Alexis Sanchez out. He's on his way to Inter Milan, according to Simon Mullock. That's the back page of the Sunday People this morning. Another story which we'll get on to a bit later. FIFA wanting machines now to run the line. So if you're sick of VAR, you might get sick of this, because according to Harry Pratt, the FIFA are testing technology that could one day replace the human element on the touchlines. We'll get into that a bit later. Good news for Frank Lampard and his Chelsea side. Wham bam, Frankie Tam. Couple of goals for Abraham yesterday at Norwich. Chelsea winning 3-2. It's made it onto the front page of the Sun's goals section. The People as well reflecting on the baby blues. The youngsters scoring for Chelsea yesterday, just ahead of an England squad announcement. Timing is everything in this game. Timing is everything. Booking the guests as well. Andy's here because he was at Anfield yesterday, and you were particularly impressed, and who wouldn't be, by the performance of Mo Salah. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this and Liverpool's performance, and particularly Mo Salah, and just how majestic it was, Andy.
Yeah, I was impressed with him last night, the same way as I've been impressed with him from the moment he walked through the door at Anfield, from the moment he's come into that club. And you know what, it was interesting, I was thinking back to last season and the start of last season, this sort of stage of last season and going forward. And Salah scored a couple of goals. Bear in mind, he'd had that stellar season, the 40-plus goals season of the year before, his Football of the Year season. And last season, he scored a few goals, and he had these sullen celebrations, and people were saying, well, why isn't he celebrating? You know, and the narrative beneath it was, there's something not quite right with Mohamed Salah. He ends up scoring 22 goals, shares the Golden Boot, plays an instrumental part in the Champions League victory, and still there are people sort of suggesting, well, actually, you know, is everything OK with Mo Salah? And Gary Neville, of course, you know, on Sky came on and said he could see it, smell it, feel it, that the Salah might be gone within 12 months. That might still be the case, but all you could smell, see, feel yesterday was Salah enjoying himself. Hey, boy, there was no sullen celebrations of his penalty or of that wonderful second goal that he scored. It was a joyous celebration. He looks absolutely up for it right to this moment. There was none of that. You know, he seems to be enjoying his football as much as he was when he joined Liverpool, and he is equally as effective. I mean, bear in mind, that second goal yesterday was fantastic, you know. I mean, OK, it's David Luiz, and David Luiz, you know, there's a brainstorm in him just waiting to happen. It happened for the penalty, and then, of course, he couldn't really commit, although he did commit, but then couldn't pull Salah back for the second goal. And Salah's away from him so quickly. But it's not as though it's a Luiz mistake. I mean, it's not as though Salah's got nothing else to do once he's beaten Luiz near the halfway line. It's a brilliant run and a brilliant finish. He's a guy on top of his game. And now that Eden Hazard has left the Premier League, he is without doubt the biggest single game changer in the Premier League. And it's not as though Liverpool are desperate for a game changer, because all round they are superb. But they've got one in Salah, and he was that yesterday. He really was. And I just wanted to highlight that contrast between Salah looking, although claiming he wasn't unhappy at stages last season, and at the start of the season, from the moment he scored against Norwich on the opening Friday of the season, he looks like a player who's thoroughly enjoying his football. He looks like a player who certainly has got no intentions of leaving Liverpool anytime soon. As I say, that might well change. You know, Gary Neville, for example, might well have a point. You know, come the end of this season, he might want a bigger challenge. When I say bigger challenge, he might want a different challenge. He might want a Real Madrid, or he might want to go and try his luck in Italy, back in Italy. But at the moment, he just looks like an integral part of a Liverpool team who, on the broader picture, just get more impressive every time you watch them. Yeah. They really do. They really do.
They look very comfortable at times yesterday, didn't they? Jeremy, we've seen the greats over the years, and if we just think about forwards, if we just isolate the forward line and think maybe back to Cantona right at the beginning, right through to the Zolas, Thierry Henry, is Salah in that company now?
I think he is now. I think when you go into a third season doing it, I suppose the slight asterisk is if he can help Liverpool win the league, that probably puts you up in the absolute Henry, Cantona category. When you take a club that...
When you inspire them to do it.
Yeah, wasn't quite regularly winning leagues to do that as Henry and Cantona did. Zola obviously didn't quite have that effect at Chelsea. So I think he's in that second bracket down, probably needs a couple more years. But it's there to do in the next couple of years. When you look at Liverpool and the development of Liverpool, who, picking up on what Andy said, I think I saw them against Southampton the week before, and I'm thinking, are they that good? And I saw them against Brighton earlier in the year, and I sort of had the same thought. And then you watched the way they sort of did a number on Tottenham in the Champions League final, and the same yesterday. I think they can play at levels, which is a real sign of a great team. The one concern with them is that front three have played a lot of games. I think they've all played more than 50 games since the start of last season. They all played through the summer. And when you compare them to Manchester City, that would be my worry if I was a Liverpool fan, that if anything happened, that the fact that they've had that huge weight of games, all three of them, and the backup is probably not quite what Manchester City's is. I'm
still struggling to get over the size of this byline in the mirror this morning.
It's not big enough, actually. Is that what you're trying to say?
Not for you. Look at Andy Dunn's profile and look at Mo Salah's profile on the back page. I don't know who's got a better deal out of that.
Do you remember that famous story? We won't name him, the journalist, but who had a byline that size, and then he'd filed his report, and the guy on the desk called back and said, "Listen, we're going to have to cut some of your words out." He said, "No, you can't cut any of my words out." He said, "OK, well, we'll have to cut down the size of your picture." He says, "I'll cut some of the words out then." I won't name him.
Yeah, well, tweet us who you think that would have been. It wasn't Andy Dunn. I'm not sure I even know the answer to that. But,
but I'll take the break.
Yeah. OK, sounds like one for the dinner table. Mark, this front three that Jeremy's just mentioned, and it is formidable. It's one of the best in the world, undoubtedly, we know that. Do we think, did Klopp engineer this? Was this by design, the players, the formation that he has and the way that he utilises them, or did he fall upon it because this is the personnel and worked out a way to get the best out of three of them?
Well, Firmino came in before Klopp arrived, but there are suggestions that he was, certainly people around him were kind of aware of Firmino before Klopp went in, and that the building was already in place before Klopp arrived to make sure that when he did arrive there was a team in place. So he brought Salah, he brought in Mane, and I think the three of them together are why, Salah can have a great game, Mane can have a great game. I think Mane went under the radar a bit last season. He was, as influential as Salah in many ways, and people talk about Salah for the Golden Boot or the Ballon d'Or. I think Mane is a contender as well. But I think the difference this year is that you talk about Salah's happiness and his mood. I just think winning the Champions League has made a massive difference to Liverpool, just in terms of the psychological benefit of winning a big trophy and what it means in terms of the pressure being off. And the mood at Anfield is lifted. The mood of the players is lifted. They're talking differently now. They're talking as if they're winners. And I think Salah knows that he's in a place where he can win things, they've won things, and the next big challenge is winning the league. And I think he knows that where he is now, he can inspire, like Henry did at Arsenal, Cantona at United, he can inspire Liverpool to win the first title, with 30 years by the time they win it, if they win it this year. So I just think he knows that he's in a place where everything is almost built around him. When last season he went to New York for an award, I think, and people are saying, well, how can you let him go to New York for this award when you've got a game in 2 days' time? And Klopp was like, well, he looks after himself, he's earned the award. And they give him allowances because they know he delivers on the pitch. And for players like that who know that they're not the special. I mean, someone at Liverpool told me that Salah knows he has a mystique about him, and he likes to kind of encourage that mystique by speaking to Vanity Fair, speaking to CNN, and just being a bit different. So when the club has a player like that, they have to indulge him a little bit. And I think he's being indulged, but looked at it in the right way, and he's repaying them. And I think he's happy because he can do things that other players can't.
I think that's a really good point. You mentioned the Ballon d'Or, and I think that whole idea you're putting across there, Mark, is absolutely spot on, because he, on a personal level, is thinking that he is not far off. We said this with Hazard. We've said it many years about Eden Hazard. He's not far off now, Salah, the Messi, Ronaldo table. You know, they've dined at their own table for so long, and I think Salah now genuinely believes, and you know, some Liverpool fans would believe, and I'm sure Klopp would believe, that he's, you know, he can break that up. He can break that hegemony up. You know, he is that important to Liverpool. He is that much of a game changer. He is a player of that ilk that basically you almost know what he's going to do, but it's unstoppable, as it was for that second goal yesterday. And that's why you're right. Liverpool are willing to, you know. There's nothing wrong in encouraging that. There's nothing wrong in encouraging Salah to actually believe he's up there with those type of players, because Liverpool get the benefit, just as Barcelona got the benefit, just as Real Madrid, and now Juventus are getting the benefit from Messi and Ronaldo.
And no sign of Liverpool's ambition slowing, because of course they've got plans to increase the capacity at Anfield as well. So it says they're building for the future, they want to sustain it, and they want to keep challenging for the biggest trophies in the game.
I think that's been one of the really impressive things about the ownership since they've come in, where there was always that discussion about the stadium and talking about sharing it with Everton. But Anfield, I mean, Andy was there yesterday. Yeah. It's such an advantage, to be able to stay in that home that has all that history, and the solution they found by creating a modern Anfield that gives you the size of the stadium but still keeps that aura about the place, I think is one of the smartest and most important things the owners have done.
They've got it right on and off the pitch in every aspect. Off the pitch is brilliant now. Outside the ground, inside the ground, European nights. And people talk about, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And we've seen it on these European nights where teams go there, and it's not. I don't.
When you say on and off, what do you mean? What are the examples?
Well, the way they've
changed it.
The way they've got a kind of, there's a real togetherness with the supporters in the club, and you know, just go down 20 miles down the road to Manchester. There's no togetherness at Man United and the board there. Everyone at Liverpool seems to walk in step. So there's a real kind of sense of belonging there now. And people might mock and say it doesn't mean anything, but it does. And you can really sense when you go to Liverpool that everybody's in it together. And I think that makes a difference when clubs are successful. Everybody has to be kind of marching in step. There's no kind of dissenting voices. And we talk about the European nights, and the way I see it is that it doesn't make a significant effect on the opposition. It makes Liverpool just run that bit harder, play that bit harder. And the players are so inspired by it. And you see it in league games now, and you know, Premier League games, every Premier League game is like an event, an occasion. It's like a European night, and it's such a big advantage for Liverpool.
Absolutely. You know, people outside Liverpool, I mean, quite rightly, you know, this whole campaign that they had, this means more. You know, this is Liverpool, this means more. Which, of course, it doesn't mean anymore. It doesn't mean Liverpool doesn't mean any more, you know, than any other club you'd wish to name.
We'll say that to a Bury fan, right?
Well,
Bolton.
Yeah, well, exactly. You know, and football is football. So it's obviously it's guff, really, isn't it? You know, this means more. But having said that, the fans buy into it, and the fans create, no getting away from it, the atmosphere and intensity at Anfield is the best in the Premier League. There's just no getting away from that, whether you're a fan or not. There is no escaping that fact. And Klopp has been very clever. You know, he was mocked that time when he took the players for a bow. I think they'd drawn
West Brom.
They'd drawn against West Brom, and he was pilloried for it. Quite right, understandably so. You've just drawn a home against West Brom, for goodness sake. But you know what? He's nurtured that crowd step by step. How often does he play them? How often does he say to them, "You are," the old-fashioned phrase, "you are the 12th man. You've got a huge role to play in this football club. You can lift us against Barcelona, to beat Barcelona 4-0. How important you are." And yesterday at the game, for example, you know, it was incredible. It was a great atmosphere ahead of the game. It's not often you see that now before a match. It was a brilliant atmosphere. And you could tell the Arsenal players, I mean, Ceballos, you know, he was obviously a gem of a player, but, you know, the intensity, he couldn't cope with it early on. And Mark's right, that intensity is matched on the pitch. You know, they are incredibly... And they feed each other. So Liverpool are incredibly intense on the pitch, and that goes into the stand, comes back to the players, and redoubles. And that's why they're 42 Premier League games at home unbeaten. 32 wins and 10 draws in 42 Premier League games. It's a remarkable record. Yeah,
it certainly is. What about Arsenal's record at Anfield? Because it doesn't get any better. They lost again yesterday, but people seem to think that the performance had improved and Arsenal was somehow improving. I didn't see a great deal of that myself. They were 3-0 down before Toronto scored 5 minutes from time.
I wondered before the game whether they might get a draw and then it might be a bit of a moment where you thought, oh, maybe things are changing a little bit at Arsenal. I do think they're better than last season, and it would have been interesting if Pepe had scored that chance early on. I still think Liverpool would have, talking about they seem to have gears, and I think they would have still found a way to get through the game okay. They're in a transitional period, but where they spent money in the summer, the ownership, they cleared out the thing with Usman off. They've got a clean ownership situation there now. The Cronkies are in full control. They seem to be more aggressive in what they've done. There seems to be a suggestion they might have put a bit of their own money in through the summer. It's not quite clear till the accounts come out. So I think there has been a gear shift at Arsenal, but there's still a big gap between Manchester City and Liverpool and the rest of the league. I think Arsenal could still be around 3rd, 4th and still have a realistic shot at the Champions League. I think yesterday probably just told you more about the gap between Manchester City and Liverpool and the rest than Arsenal, who I think have made progress but not... They've made steps but not huge strides, I think, is where they are at the moment.
Yeah, and David Luiz, his performance yesterday, because of course he missed the first game, which was the Newcastle game, Burnley last week. He settled straight into the side, and then yesterday this is the David Luiz that people the mistakes that he's got in him, or the errors. This is classic, vintage David Luiz.
I remember the game at Tottenham last season when he was just hopeless, and he has games like this where he just looks terrible and an absolute liability. But the week after, he'll be brilliant. He'll get the ball. He'll dictate the play. But that's what you get with David Luiz. And I know the reasons why Arsenal signed him was to bring a bit of leadership and a bit of character in the back. But you know, that this is what'll happen. But I do think that he's better than what they had. I mean, he's better than Koscielny was, because I think Koscielny was one of the most overrated and overhyped defenders ever. And I'll probably get quite a bit of abuse for that. But I just think he never performed away from home like you'd expect a leader to do. I just think he was 3 or 4 years past his best when he left. And I think Luiz, as erratic as he can be, is a better defender for Arsenal than Koscielny was. And the other defenders that they let go in the past, that Mustafi's still there, people like that. So it shows how bad Arsenal have been that David Luiz is an improvement.
Yeah.
Reading your piece this morning, you didn't have a great deal of sympathy for David Luiz, but on reflection, Andy, do you feel sorry for him in any way that look, he's just been rinsed by one of the world's best players?
No, I don't feel sorry for him. He's a likable.
Not on this programme.
He's a likable guy. You know, and fair play for him to coming out to us after the game and trying to explain to us that it wasn't actually a penalty when he swapped shirts with Mo Salah before the final whistle. He was trying to claim that something about the fabric of the shirt that's too light, and it wasn't really a drag back. But he pulled the shirt. It was as obvious a penalty as you could wish to see. And then, of course, he put himself in that position for the second goal. But he actually played quite well first half. He actually did quite well. He reads the game very well. Normally, he misread it for the Salah goal, for the Salah penalty, and paid the penalty. You know what? One thing that struck me at the end of the game is that Arsenal, listen, they're a nice team. And I agree with Jeremy. I think it highlighted the gap between the sort of bottom end of the big six to the top end, from the likes of Arsenal and Man United to Liverpool and Man City. And Arsenal will beat a lot of teams below the big six. They will. So they'll be OK. And they're a nice team. But at the final whistle, it did... I'm not saying that people should be absolutely down on themselves when they've just been beaten. But, Luiz and Salah, I know they're probably old friends from, old acquaintances from Chelsea. I assume they were there at the same time. I can't quite recall. But they'll know each other anyway. And they were very, very nice, very friendly after the game, having a laugh, having a joke. Kolasinac, who'd come on, was having a joke, swapped shirts on the pitch. And I just did think, you know what, they've just been hammered at Anfield, really. 3-1 was kind.
Who swapped shirts at Old Trafford after 45 minutes? The Arsenal player.
That was not Reyes. No, it wasn't Reyes. No,
player, wasn't
it was.
Half-time.
Recently,
The fullback.
Santos.
Fullback, Santos, yes, it
Did he ever
was.
play again?
Didn't play much.
But I did think, they were really, really nice. They were really nice. I mean, I can't remember, again, it's been a long night, but I can't remember it in terms of, I can't remember a particularly bad foul in the game. I don't know. There was obviously a yellow card for David Luiz for the tug on Mo Salah. And I did think, you know what I mean? They are just a bit too nice. They should be trudging off, really annoyed with themselves for wasting a decent first half performance.
Yeah, I agree. OK, but a good performance, an exceptional performance again from Mo Salah and his Liverpool side. They beat Arsenal 3-1 last night. OK, let's get on to Manchester United. Lost at home yesterday to Crystal Palace. Massive win for Roy Hodgson's side, which of course will give them due credit in a few moments' time. But first, let's talk about events at Old Trafford at Manchester United over the last few days, because Paul Pogba and the penalty situation yesterday with Marcus Rashford, and also we have to take this into account. It all does merge into one in a way, unfortunately, is of course is the abuse that the players receive on social media. And it's not isolated, it's not just Manchester United players, but it happens to a lot of different players. But we have to take it into account because it is Manchester United and has affected two of their players over the last few days, Mark. But just talk us through, because you were at Molineux on Monday night to see Manchester United draw. That was the Paul Pogba penalty. Yesterday it was Marcus Rashford's turn. Rashford scored against Chelsea on the opening day of the season.
Yeah, I was at Molineux, and obviously I was at Old Trafford the week before, so when Pogba won a penalty, great work by Pogba to win it at Wolves. We were expecting Rashford to take it, and then there's this strange kind of, is it me, is it you? And Pogba took it, and Rashford was like, shrugging his shoulders. Then he missed. And we asked Solskjaer after the game about it. He was very blasé about it almost. I said, well, we've got two penalty takers and they're both good penalty takers, and, whichever's the most confident at the time. But the point was made to Solskjaer that what happens if they're both confident? Well, then what? Do you just wait until they decide? Is it a 5-minute, wait until, one decides to take it?
Paper, scissors, stone.
Exactly, yeah. And, one decided to take it and he missed. So yesterday, Rashford steps up, takes it and misses it. It was a good penalty in the sense that it sent the keeper the wrong way, but it missed. I just think that it's just weak management by Solskjaer, this, and maybe it's stretched too far to blame him for the two misses. But I think if you'd have been stronger to say to Pogba, look, prior to yesterday, Rashford hadn't missed a penalty. Pogba had missed, I think, 3, and then it was his 4th at Molineux. Solskjaer should have said to Pogba, look, Rashford is our penalty taker. If he's not on the pitch, then you take it. But whenever he's on the pitch, he takes the penalties, and that would have dealt with it. But Ollie's just kind of fudged it all week by saying that, I'm happy for it to continue. It continued yesterday, and I just wonder whether Rashford steps up to take this penalty yesterday, and he's aware of the fuss that's gone on all week about should he take it at the week, and an issue's been created around the penalty, and he missed. So, for me, Solskjaer should have been stronger right from the outset and said, Marcus Rashford's our penalty taker, deal with it, Paul Pogba. I can't think of any, top-ranked managers who would say to their players, just decide between yourselves. Can you imagine Mourinho or Fergie or Arsene Wenger in the glory days saying, just decide between yourselves, it's fine, it's only a penalty, it's only a match-winning situation, just decide between yourselves. It's ridiculous.
Well, what strikes me is they win 4-0 on the opening day of the season against Chelsea, which was an emphatic, an excellent result, whichever way you look at it in terms of the performance and whether the scoreline reflected Manchester United's performance and was unfortunate for Chelsea. It's 4-0 against Chelsea on the opening day of the season. It's on the opening weekend is a significant result. And then the Wolves game comes along, Pogba misses, Rashford misses yesterday. The Pogba miss created a week-long soap opera and a week-long event that was completely unnecessary. And unnecessary around that club, having had the feel-good factor of a 4-0 victory against Chelsea on the opening weekend.
Yeah, do you think that feel-good factor has in some way gone? I mean, I guess it's been diluted.
And lost one. They lost home to Crystal Palace.
It's been diluted, but I don't think we should really...
About to be relegated without winning a game.
I don't think we should overreact to the last two results. OK, these penalty misses have played their part.
And it's Man United.
But from what I've seen, yes, absolutely. We're quite entitled to overreact to Man United, and in particular to Paul Pogba, I guess.
No, I'm not overreacting. I'm saying it's Man United. You're meant to. You are meant to win. The demands are you win every week.
Yes. Well,
you have no right to win, but the demands are you win every game.
Yeah, the demands are, but the demands are that you play well every game. The demands are that if you don't win, you at least play well. And from what I can see, I was at neither the Wolves game nor the game yesterday, so I can't comment accurately on that. But from what I've seen from the highlights, they played OK. They played quite decently at Wolves, and probably played quite well yesterday, from what I could see. So I don't think there's any real need to overreact to that situation. Has it created an unnecessary soap opera around this whole penalty thing? Yes. Should the players be affected by that? Well, no. I mean, it's a penalty, for goodness sake. I watched Jordan Pickford smash a penalty into the I can't remember, top corner or whatever in the Nations League. Now, I know it's not the same pressure, but it's a penalty, and any professional should be able to take a penalty no matter what the situation, no matter what the hullabaloo surrounding it is. I totally agree that it seems a no-brainer. The manager says, right, he's on the pitch, he takes the penalty. If he's not, you take the penalty. If you're not, number 3 takes the penalty, or whatever, if they both are on the pitch. That's obviously a no-brainer. However, there is still no excuse for missing a penalty. So I don't really... I think the whole thing surrounding it shouldn't be affecting the players. Paul Pogba is a World Cup winner. Marcus Rashford has scored penalties for England, so it shouldn't really affect them. On the broader picture, yes, I think Solskjaer, particularly yesterday, will look back at that as a very unfortunate defeat. But I think it's too early yet to be really sort of questioning the direction he's taken them in, because that was a young team that's playing yesterday. It will develop. I think it was the youngest team for a little while that United have fielded. And I think they will develop. I don't think there's any real cause for alarm just yet.
That's part of the problem, though. It is a young team.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the fans are, I won't say on the brink of revolt, but they're very close to getting angry with the owners again, because, you know, the outgoings this year, I think Fellaini went, Herrera went, Valencia went, Lukaku's gone. None have really been replaced, and that say what you like about Fellaini and Lukaku, but they're experienced players that would contribute something. Last summer the net spend was £75 million. This summer the net spend was 65. They're just not spending the money that Man United earn, and that squad is very thin. And I think they're an injury away from a crisis in every department if Maguire gets injured.
The only thing I'd say, Mark, about that is Fred wasn't in the squad yesterday, was he?
No, because he's not good enough.
Yeah, but you're saying they're thin, but they've got players not in the squad. Fred, Alexis Sanchez.
It's the quality, isn't it? It's the quality of the squad. They've still got 25 players like everybody else has got, but the quality of those players isn't very good, and Fred hasn't been near the team. Sanchez, I think Sanchez is worthy of persevering with, because he's a player that's got experience, he's been around the block. You could rely on him if you can get him performing right to score 10, 12 goals, but Solskjaer's made his mind up about him, or the owners have made the mind up about him and the money that he's earning and getting off the wage bill. But for me, United are miles short of the top 4, and I think 6th place is the best it can hope for. And because you've got teams like Wolves and Leicester and Everton who've shown a bit of ambition this year, invested well, there's a real concern amongst United fans that this could be the year that they drop out of the top 6, and it sounds ridiculous, but you know, if Rashford or Pogba or Maguire get injured, then they haven't got anyone to come in. You take Pogba out of that midfield, there's nothing there, and that is because gradual kind of lack of investment, lack of strategic investment, bad signings, bad decisions across the board, stemming from Ed Woodward through to the manager. You know, weak management in Ole Solskjaer, the penalties. You could say weak decision by Woodward and the Glazers to give Solskjaer the job in April when there were still 2 months of the season to go. And then what happened? The results dropped off a cliff. They won 2 in 12. So I think you were saying it's a bit early to start getting carried away with United. I think
if you had those statistics this season, 2 in 12, you had that to this season. All of a sudden, they played 3 games. They've won 1, drawn 1, lost 1. So that's 3 in 15.
I think it's 1 clean sheet since February as well, which points back to David De Gea, who's on the brink of a new contract, who let another one in yesterday. And I think there's a lot of problems at United, which I think people are beginning to realise now. Then the Chelsea one was a bit like the Emperor's New Clothes. It's like, that's not really what the situation is. So I think Southampton away at the weekend, tough game. Leicester at home after that. The games don't get any easier for United, and I think it's going to be one of those seasons where there's going to be a few of these weekends. But
Jeremy, on Friday, you couldn't find a person in the country, I think, who looked at Manchester United Palace on paper. The start at Palace and had struggling to score goals. Said, fear for Palace tomorrow at Old Trafford, and then they go and pull off a result like this. How and why the results like this happen? Of course, they're heartwarming for Crystal Palace fans, and they provide shock value. But how did they manage to do it?
Partly it's the beauty of football. It's very unpredictable. That's why we, maybe at the very top end it's got a bit predictable, but you do always get results like this. But I think there are underlying reasons. I think it's Manchester United, for all the possession they had, didn't create a whole heap of clear goal opportunities yesterday, and I think it's indicative of an underlying nervousness, lack of confidence about the whole project there, that you go up against a team like Crystal Palace, who are well organised, effective, can hurt you on the break. We know what Roy Hodgson will do. You're vulnerable against teams like that if you're where Manchester United are at the moment. I remember, obviously, spent a lot of time watching Arsenal, and Arsenal were very like that for a lot of years. They might dominate games, but that underlying feeling that they're not quite right made them very vulnerable against any team that was well set up and could play on the break. And going back to Dunny's point about it being early in the season, which is obviously absolutely right, but when you look at Liverpool and the wage bills, the amount Manchester United there's already a 5-point gap, and you can already see a sort of 20-30 point gap opening up by the end of the season again.
I think United have realised that they've made big mistakes in the transfer market. They've paid too much money. on wages and on fees, and they're going the other way now, and it will take time. But I just think that the problem is there's not enough experience there in key areas, and I think if certain players get injured, then they're really struggling.
Yeah. OK, I'd like to move on to the abuse that Manchester United play. Not alone in this, but there are some prime examples this week. Paul Pogba, Marcus Rashford yesterday. You've written about it in your column. Ollie Holt devotes his entire column to it this morning, blaming the cesspit of Twitter misses the point. He says that the clubs must do more to stop the scapegoating of black footballers. What are your views, Andy? What, if any, solutions do we have?
Well, on this particular one, I would recommend reading Ollie's column this morning. I agree with
and yours.
I agree. Well, I've only done about 8 parts in my column, but basically, I agree with Ollie's and his entire column with it, and I agree with everything he's saying. Is that this is absolutely? I mean, it's so right that this horrible, vile, racist abuse that appears on Twitter is highlighted and tackled. But you know, football clubs, have they got it within themselves to tackle it on Twitter? Well, no. The people who should be responsible for social media abuse are the social media companies. It's their job. They have the wherewithal. They have the facilities. They have the intelligence to discover who these people are, to stop the creation of fake accounts, to block these type of vile tweets and vile posts on other social media networks, all social media networks. So it's their job. And football clubs are right to meet with them. Football clubs are right to highlight it. Players are right to say it's disgraceful, disgusting and must stop, and to take whatever action they can. But I think Ollie's point, and I agree with this, is that we shouldn't let these basically, you know, these vile people who hide behind fake social media accounts and post racist abuse, we shouldn't let that become the top of the agenda in football's fight against racism, because what football, the fundamental issues with football, which are still there, are things like factors like the disgraceful lack of BAME representation at executive level, boardroom level, coaching level, managerial level, administration level. These are the things.
Plus the media. I'd add the media as well.
Plus the media, but that's a media issue. That's not a football issue. That's a media issue. In the same way that the social media issue is a social media issue. I'm not saying they shouldn't get involved, but we shouldn't let that distract from the fact that there's a huge fight still to be had in football against those type of things that I've just highlighted. The fact that, you know, now with Sol Campbell quitting, we only have a handful of black, is it 4 or 5, but black coaches throughout the divisions. These are the issues that have to be tackled. These are the issues that are within, and racism within football grounds. So no more token punishments of semi-closures of grounds, etc. No more sort of fines that aren't big enough. These are the things that are within football's power to deal with. I don't think that Twitter is.
What I struggle to understand, or fail to understand, Jeremy, is that anybody yesterday waiting for Marcus Rashford to take that penalty at Old Trafford is waiting on their keyboard, and their reflex reaction from that penalty miss is to type out the levels of racist abuse that was directed at Rashford yesterday. I actually can't comprehend why you would think to do that, and why you would then go on to do it.
Absolutely, me neither. But what I would say is that if Twitter has created basically a platform where anyone can say anything, and also they can do it anonymously. Now, well, the result of that is inevitable, sadly, because if anybody can say anything and do so anonymously, unfortunately, there's always going to be someone out there that does this, and that's why I think everyone should take responsibility, as you were saying, for what they can impact on. And I do think a sort of reckoning is coming for the social media companies, because we all work in the media. It'd be unimaginable to create in a newspaper or on broadcast a forum where you could do that, because you would know what could happen. And I think that legally, and also in terms of the clubs now, I feel like Twitter and the social media companies are going to have to address this.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're a publisher, aren't they?
Yeah, and I mean, Harry Maguire made a really good point on Twitter where he said, you know, why in order to, if you want to contribute on Twitter, if you want to contribute on social media, join the debate, surely you should provide some identification who you are, so that there's some accountability for what you say. There's no other sphere of the media where you can just say anything with no retribution. I think this is something that's going to run and run, and I think that legal people will be looking at it very carefully.
Does anybody on this table know anything about the bots that have surfaced this week that people are talking about? That bots are responsible for all these different social media tweets. It may not be actually a person. It's
a bit above my head, but I just think it's a really difficult one, this, because this has now become a bit of a trend, hasn't it? So whether it's attention seeking or whatever, I don't know what it is, but today, if Raheem Sterling misses a penalty or something, the same will happen again, and that is the problem. And I think, how do we stop it? Well, it's impossible to stop it on Twitter unless you have keywords that are just not allowed to be used on the platform. That if anyone types in certain words, that they are automatically not published, but then they'll say, well, that stops freedom of speech. But is freedom of speech the ability to abuse somebody with such reckless and hurtful terms? It's just staggering. But it's a real debate that, I mean, look, we're four middle-aged white guys around the table. That's part of the problem, isn't it? You know, I think football at every level, UEFA, FIFA, within the game, needs more black representatives to deal with this and to take on the social media companies. How would they deal with it?
Four white guys around the table isn't stoking up racist abuse.
No, absolutely not.
That's not motivating. It's just a reflection of the media, isn't it?
Of course it is, yeah. But sometimes it's uncomfortable that the debate is, we're having this debate when I think that we should give more voices to the people that are affected by it, people like Marcus Rashford, Paul Pogba, Tammy Abraham, to deal directly with these problems and say how they will deal with it, because they're the ones that have been directly affected by it. And I think sometimes that can be forgotten about, that we all talk about this stain on society. Well, I'd love to hear them directly saying what they feel directly and how hurtful it is and how bad it is for society, never mind football.
Yeah.
And the irony is, what exacerbates the situation is that these are tweets. You know, we don't know. You mentioned that the possibility they're automatically generated or they're from fake accounts or whatever. We don't know. But what we do know is that they are given the oxygen of publicity. I mean, that is a fact. You know, and whether or not, you know, yes, should it be tackled? Absolutely. Sometimes do you think, you know, well, actually, you know what I mean? These are just these are vermin who are not even worthy of discussion. But I mean, that's the age-old dilemma that you have.
Yeah, it certainly is.
When there are obvious things to be tackled in terms of racism in football, more obvious things than that.
Welcome back to the Sunday Supplement. We're going to talk about Bury and Bolton in a few moments' time. With us this morning, of course, Andy Dunn, Jeremy Wilson and Mark Ogden. Let's just remind you what's in the papers. We've been talking about Mighty Mo, a couple more goals for him yesterday at Anfield in that 3-1 victory over Arsenal. Andy, of course, was at the game. We've just been talking about this too, this story on the back of the Sunday Mirror, United against racism. This is after the social media attacks directed at Marcus Rashford after his penalty miss yesterday. Hopefully we'll get onto this story a little bit later. Tom Hopkinson will be about as popular with Palace fans as I am right now. Paris Saint-Germain move for a £100 million Wilfried Zaha, who's on the pitch yesterday for Palace in their 2-1 victory over Manchester United. Back page of the Sunday People, Simon Mullock's story. He says that Alexis Sanchez about to get a move to Inter Milan on loan for the season. Inter Milan paying up to half of his wages. The Sunday Mirror's front page of their football pullout. Frank's a million. It's two young guns. Tammy Abraham with a couple. Mason Mount with another excellent goal yesterday. 3-2 victory for them up at Carrow Road against Norwich. And the league granting Bury extra time, Tuesday Lifeline, to complete their takeover. We'll talk about them in a few moments' time. But we mentioned at the top of the show, timing's everything. Andy was at Liverpool yesterday to see them dismantle Arsenal. Mark, you were at Bolton. You saw them lose 5-0 at home to Ipswich Town in front of just over 5,000, about 5,400, wasn't it? And of course, the context of this is you've been at Bolton during the good times, the good days, when Sam Allardyce was manager, JJ Okocha, Herrero in defence, all those great names, and look where they are now. Can you just try to paint that picture of what the club was and what it is now?
Well, I'm doing a piece on Bury and Bolton at some point this week, but it keeps changing every day. So I went to Bolton yesterday to try and get a sense of it, and you know, what struck me at the time was how quiet it was outside the ground. That there were 5,500 people there, the lowest ever league game at the Reebok, the Mapcron, whatever you want to call it. And you're right, you know, 10, 15 years ago, Bolton were being held up as an example to all clubs of a certain level of how to compete in the Premier League. You know, Sam Allardyce brought in this great staff of forward-thinking people. The whole Pro Zone thing was started by Sam, and, you know, the Campos, the Koches, Nicholas Anelkas. And there were times when you used to go to Bolton thinking, they were going to turn the big teams over. They won at Old Trafford a couple of times. They beat Liverpool there. Rafa Benitez hated going to the Reebok because, you know, he was always worried about the sort of treatment they get. And I remember one game when Arsene Wenger was there with Arsenal, and they were turning up and ended up 2-2, and Wenger's taking his tie off in frustration because of the way that Bolton were playing. So, you know, Bolton were always a great story, but...
Remember when he sent Jack Wilshere there on loan, didn't he? Just to toughen up a bit.
Daniel Sturridge as well.
But, you know, the problems they got now, you can probably trace back to the tail end of the Sam years, because after Sam left, that they started to, you know, spend a little bit less. And I was told the other day a story about Sam he brought in a cryogenics chamber at Bolton so the players could get treatment in this kind of cryotherapy room. And once Sam left, they were told they couldn't use it. They were cutting back on the costs, and that was a sign even then that it wasn't going how they wanted it. They ended up selling the training ground to Wigan for £2 million. This training ground that Big Sam had built up. And then, you know, the decline carried on, and now they're in League One in administration, minus 11 points, and on the brink of a takeoff, which is been on the brink for about 3 or 4 weeks. And the latest of the Football League have told Bolton that if there's no sign of progress by Tuesday at 5 p.m, they'll be given notice, I think 14-day notice, that their golden share will be revoked, a bit like the Bury situation. So in 2 weeks' time, Bolton could be expelled from the league. And you know, yesterday was really sad, because the top tiers of the stadium were all closed. There were 4 17-year-olds in the Bolton team. They conceded 5 goals for the 3rd successive game. They had a game called off in midweek against Doncaster because the club felt that safeguarding issues were because of the young players. Phil Parkinson resigned as manager in midweek. And it was so bad yesterday. After 3-0, once it get 3-0, they turned the scoreboard off. So, you know, everyone knows the score, but it was just to avoid the kids, I suppose, looking at the scoreboard thinking 5 again. So it's really grim. I think they're obviously going to get relegated this year. They're on a minus 11 points as it is, so they haven't got a manager. It's really sad because, you know, you can talk about Bury. You know, Bury have always had problems, you know, fighting for their place because they're surrounded by Man United, Man City, Bolton, Burnley, Blackburn, all these bigger clubs. But Bolton, you know, Bolton were punching with the big boys a decade ago and playing in Europe, drawing with Bayern Munich in the Allianz Arena in the Europa League. So Bury's a different story, but Bolton is just one of these stories that it's just, you know, Eddie Davis, when he sold their kind of Jack Walker, when he sold the club, he wrote off £170 million of personal loans, and he died last year. And you know there's no way back. But £170 million of debt they were in.
Mark, what's your gut feeling on Bolton, because they've had a pretty severe warning over the last 24 hours, haven't they, about their future? What's your gut feeling?
I think that is more of a case of hurry up and get it done. I think Bolton will be okay. I think they will. That's my gut feeling. I spoke to a couple of people involved in the proposed takeover, and there's a confidence it'll be done. But you know, that was 10 days ago, and it's not been done yet. So at some point, it has to be done. But I just think, you know, Bolton they're a bigger club than Bury. They've got a bigger catchment area. They've got a brand new stadium. I think Bolton are a much more appealing club to people to buy, and I think Bolton will be okay. Bury's a different matter. I don't know, but I think Bury have had a bit of a lifeline. But again, they've got a 5 p.m. deadline on Tuesday. I think that is the final deadline.
Jeremy, you've got the inside track on events at Gig Lane. What's going on there? What will happen?
Well, I happen to know the two guys that are trying to buy the club. I've sort of come across it. One of them's coached at Barnet, another one's worked as an analyst, and they're quite interesting guys, very mathematical, been around football for a long time. I don't think they're like sort of coming in with loads of money, but they're really interested in getting a club and doing it their way, a bit like maybe Tony Bloom successfully done at Brighton and Matthew Benham at Brentford. They're very into their analytics, very interested in football. They certainly come from a wanting to do something interesting and rescue Bury. The practical side of it is another matter of whether they can get it done by them, because they issued a statement yesterday sort of basically saying that Tuesday till 5 o'clock, I think a legal person wasn't that they needed to look at things. And
with respect to the Football League, that is into extra. That's deep into extra time. Yeah,
and there's been talks going on for I think 10 weeks between these. I think the frustration is getting clarity from Steve Dale on various issues, and I think there's an issue.
Such a thing exists.
Yeah, and there's an issue around the status of the stadium, some sort of clause there. I don't know them that well, but I don't think they're the sort of people that are going to dive in if things aren't right, if they don't feel that they've got the assurances they need. So I don't feel, it feels a sort of in the balance situation there. It doesn't feel like, although on Friday night there was this sort of optimism and good news that there was someone that in theory he was willing to sell to, if he doesn't provide what they see as sufficient information, guarantees in terms of the deal, then I'm sure they'd walk away. So it does feel like it's right in the balance still.
Has the sport done enough here, Andy?
If you look at the overarching situation, then your instincts would be to say no. It's listen. You talk about Bolton. You say about the days of Kocher and when Big Sam was in charge.
Did I have memory phase? Herrera was.
Herrera was there. Yes,
Mark didn't reference him. I thought I suddenly started to think to myself.
Yeah, he certainly was.
Bolton shirt, yeah.
He was there alongside the greats. Him, Kevin Davis, and what? But listen, you talk about those as glory days. Listen, the glory days for Bolton. You know, with the first half of the 20th century, we're talking about glory days when they're winning multiple FA Cups. We're talking about 58, we're talking about Nat Lofthouse. You know, these are, let's not just think in this recent past. This is a club with 145 years of history. Bury is a club with, I think about 130 odd years between them anyway. They're approaching not far off 300 years of football and history.
Bury's 125, isn't it?
Yeah. Is it? So, but anyway, around that point. So let's not forget that. This Bolton Wanderers is that club. It's not just the club of that. It's a club that won things. It was a great club that was, what we would have called probably at that time an iconic club that is now in this situation. Does football have a bigger duty? In other words, it's so easy to look at that situation and look at when you said about the scoreboard going off when it was 3-0, it might have been to spare the younger players. It might have been they just couldn't afford to keep it going any longer, run out of money for their meathead or something. It's that desperate there. And you wonder, you look at it and you think, well, hang on a minute, look at all these figures. Look at, say, what agents are taken out of the game. Look at what the agents took out of this game. Look at the money that players are being played at the top level. Does the Premier League have a bigger responsibility towards football lower down the pyramid? Yes.
Welcome back. You're watching Sunday Supplement. Next up, you'll be watching Goals on Sunday. Let's find out what Alex and Cammy are up to. Alex.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah,
you good,
great.
Cammy?
Really good, thanks. We've got so much to talk about today. VAR once again. Can you believe it? After all that good football at the weekend, we're still talking VAR.
But we did see some great goals this weekend. Don't mention Arsenal to me just yet. I need to warm up into that one.
We're going to go through that one in detail for you.
Yeah, but we have. There's some lot. And our guest today?
Yeah, Danny Simpson, a championship winner with Leicester City. He'll tell us all about what he's been doing throughout the close season.
It's going to be a good one, and hope to join us then. 11:30 Sky Sports Premier League.
Hope to join them. Of course you'll join them at 11:30. That's Goals on Sunday. Follows us here on the Sunday Supplement. OK, let's talk England squad, because we have all sorts of different ideas on who should be in Gareth Southgate's first squad of the season. But he was at Sheffield United yesterday. They lost 2-1 at home to Leicester City. There are players, of course, on the show there. I mean, we know that Jamie Vardy has retired from international duty, but there are Harvey Barnes' goal. Yes, he was an absolute cracker. It's a gem. We'll get on to Chelsea in a moment because they won at Norwich with Tammy Abraham and Mason Mount. But who, in your view, could make the breakthrough into that England squad?
Well, Maddison's an interesting one at Leicester.
Yes.
He's had a great start to the season. Really, he's been actually a continuation of what he's done in recent seasons. And I think and obviously Mason Mount and Tammy Abraham have stood out at Chelsea, and I think it's just a real exciting continuation. It wasn't that long ago where we were thinking who's and almost scratching around to think who might get in the England squad, and now there seems to be new young names coming up quite every few months that you think that they could put pressure on. And I think it's a sort of testament to what the work that has been done through the Football League really and the Premier League academies, and I think where there was a big change round sort of 10, 15 years ago in how things were done, the sort of coaching mentality, and I think we're really starting to see the benefit of it. And I think there's the next few tournaments I'm sort of cautiously very optimistic about.
Well, I just wonder whether England may be seeing the benefit, just because I know if you look at Chelsea, Manchester City spending big on their academies, they're not alone because other clubs do it too. But if you look at the example of West Ham, who've gone back to their roots, Kevin Keane, who I was talking to at the weekend, most of their players are from the area, that they've gone back to this idea that you can bring through Joe Cole, Michael Carrick, Rio Ferdinand. You can do it all over again, but you've got to encourage it and you've got to give those players from those areas, whether that's Newham or going out beyond that into Essex, that you can do it. And I just wonder whether that's the benefit that England are going to see, that clubs beyond the top six, the big established order, have gone back to the way that everybody used to do things?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that things go in trends, don't they? And 20 years ago, West Ham had some great young kids, Lampard, Ferdinand, Joe Cole. United had the class of 92. Liverpool had the McManamans, Fowlers, etc. And I think they're going back to that. They've realised that, if you're a bit of patience can get you a better core of players than bringing foreign players in, left, right and centre for a lot of money. Chelsea have kind of gone back to their kids by default because of the transfer ban. And if they didn't have a transfer ban, and would they have given Mason Mount, Tammy Abrahams a chance this year? I'm not sure they would have done, but I think it's great they have. But Liverpool have brought Trent Alexander-Arnold through now. United have got Rashford, McTominay. Yep. The bigger clubs seem to be going back to English players, and I think our best players, the Champions League winning teams of United and Chelsea, had an English core, a homegrown core, and I think there's a value in that, and obviously England will benefit from it because the more English players in the Premier League, it's been dwindling over the years. I think the first weekend of the season, for the first time in about 10 years, it had gone up again, only to a small level, but it's still gone up. So there are more English players around, which is a benefit. So,
and it's the chicken and egg situation. The FA have been very, very keen to keep impressing this line that there's a dwindling number of English players starting in the Premier League. Every press conference you turn up at, the FA will have these figures to hand. Gareth Southgate will have the exact percentage to hand of how many English players started for their Premier League clubs at the weekend. It's a narrative that they are keen to push. However, on the flip side of that, those English players that are getting into Premier League teams are benefiting enormously from playing with world-class players. You can't tell me that Trent Alexander-Arnold has not improved so dramatically, because day in, day out, he's training with Mo Salah, he's training with Sadio Mane, he's training, with great players, he's training alongside Virgil van Dijk. Day in, day out on the pitch, getting coached alongside these guys. So when he makes it into the team, he's become, he's just improved enormously. And so when you are good enough and you do get in there, like Mason Mount now at Chelsea, he's playing in an exceptional and a good Big Six team. He's got to improve on that. So the players that you have got available, the players that you want to select who are playing Premier League games, they're developing so much more quickly. One thing I'll be interested to see about this squad is Phil Foden. We've started the season with Pep Guardiola saying he's the best player he's ever coached. He couldn't get an Eddie Boothroyd side at one point in the under-21s in the summer. Will Southgate pick him? I would like to think he will. I don't think he will, but I would like to see him in that squad. All of a sudden, he's got players who are playing at top Premier League clubs. Look at the right-back situation. We're in a situation where the fourth-choice right-back, maybe not even fourth choice, scored a goal in the semi-finals of the World Cup, a year ago. Trippier is now behind Walkout, Alexander-Arnold, Wan-Bissaka, to name but three. So he's got... I'm with Jeremy on this. I'm not just cautiously optimistic. I'm not wildly optimistic, but I'm optimistic.
It's not even a tournament yet, as well. We normally get.
We've had a tournament when we got beaten at tournaments in the summer. Although you probably won't class that as a tournament when you're the Nations League.
No, I do. If I count the Community Shield as a cup, then I think I have to count the Nations League as a major, as a major honour, a trophy, a significant trophy to win. Abraham and Mason Mount's goal yesterday was another exceptional finish. He got an exceptional goal as well last weekend. Tammy Abraham as well just looked like a different player, didn't he?
The finishes yesterday.
The confidence that he had in him, different to the player who started at Manchester United and then was replaced by Giroud in the following week against Leicester. Yeah,
the finishes were real top. Where you saw that and you're like, it looked like a sort of striker from the... I'm not saying he's a Salah, but the sort of goals you see regularly from that level of striker, it was that they're isolated goals at the moment, but they were that level of quality, which was really exciting to see. And Chelsea, I think Chelsea are really interesting at the moment. They've obviously... I feel like even allowing for the transfer ban, I feel they've moved into a new era. Abramovich is not in the country; he's much more standoff. I don't think they're going to try and compete in that aggressive way they did with Manchester United at the time. Now with Manchester City and Liverpool, and I think in a way it will be for a lot of people a more likeable Chelsea to see what they can do with this academy. Which, whatever anyone thinks about the spending of Abramovich, the investment that they've put into that academy, and the success that they've had in the FA Youth Cup and European competitions over the last 5-6 years has been phenomenal. And so whatever happens in terms of how much he's willing to put into the transfer market, there's that legacy of an incredible academy there that can keep Chelsea at a certain level, perhaps not up with Manchester City and Liverpool right at this moment, but will always keep them at a certain level and will make them a club that I think a lot of people will really enjoy seeing play.
Of course, they've got a popular manager. Did that make a difference considering their start? I know what they'll say about the defeat at Manchester United. I get all that. I know what they'll say about the Super Cup. But last weekend at Stamford Bridge, there were signs that actually, what is this Chelsea side going to do this season?
Yeah, I think Lampard being there does buy him a lot of time, a lot of goodwill. He's a bright English coach, as say, did well at Derby. Giving Mason Mount a chance last year. I think he's talking about English football benefiting, but Lampard's benefited himself by going to Chelsea and taking Mount back, because Mount just looks a real talent. He looks, you know, I'm not sure about Abraham long term, but I think Mount is just going to be a star. I just think he's got everything. He's tenacious, he's hungry. I mean, the goal he scored in Istanbul, which was disallowed against Liverpool in the Super Cup, was just a great finish, and he's got everything. I think he has to be in the English squad this week, and he gives England something different. That
finish was left-footed, wasn't it? Was the Super Cup goal?
Yeah, in Istanbul. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just. It was like, because I did something on the radio with Michael Owen later that week, and Michael Owen was absolutely raving about him. And you know, Michael Owen knows what it's like being a young kid playing for England. He's got that same kind of confidence, Mason Mount, that same kind of belief that even at his age, he can take on the world. And I think Chelsea, having lost Hazard, needs somebody, a star that the fans can kind of latch onto. And Mason Mount is only young, but I think he's got that confidence in himself to take it on. And he's not Eden Hazard by any means, but he's now the poster boy for Chelsea, which who'd have thought 12 months ago.
Fair play to Lampard. He didn't lay in every time I've seen. Look, I haven't been at every press conference, but he hasn't laboured the point that he's just lost one of the world's best footballers from Chelsea's left wing. When a lot of managers sort of say, "Well, you know, we sold this guy, sold one of the best for 90 million quid."
Not only has he not laboured it, he basically hasn't mentioned it.
Once,
you know,
mentioned it once.
I'd hardly mentioned it then. And to be fair, it's hardly been mentioned. You know. How can you even begin to understand the impact of if you thought of single players who are most important to their teams, you know, who have the most influence on their teams as a single player, then Hazard was probably the most important player in any football club, possibly. You know, you could say that. You could say, well, Van Dijk to Liverpool, he made a big difference, but all around him as well, there were world-class players. There was players who were winning football of the year, players like Salah and Mane. Hazard was probably the biggest single game changer, and to lose him and then not to be able to buy to replace. Okay, they already had Pulisic signed up. You know, you just can't even you can't even overestimate the impact that must have. However, going back to that transfer ban and the inability to replace him and the inability to buy more players for Lampard, I actually don't think that even had he been allowed to, I still think he would have been promoting Mount and promoting Abraham. In the same way that when they come back, don't forget, they've got Loftus-Cheek to come back, they've got Hudson-Odoi to come back. Hudson-Odoi, you know, there won't be talk of him leaving, I wouldn't imagine now, with Frank at the helm. So it's just incredibly positive, and I think that gives it, you know, the feeling you get. Listen, how long will it last, this? If Chelsea fans are happy with the start they've had, and they sound happy, then imagine if they do go on a winning streak, which they look quite capable of doing.
Yeah,
I just think it's a really nice, it's a nice story at the moment, Chelsea, and a really nice story.
Yeah. OK, welcome back. Let's talk about this story on the back page of the Mail on Sunday. It says here that Watford are considering the manager Javi Grazia's future. They lost yesterday at home to West Ham. They've lost 6 in a row in the Premier League, 3 this season. Andy, 6-0 in the FA Cup final last season against Manchester City. I'm going to allow you to make a case for Grazia, because I didn't make much of a case for him staying based on those results. But
well, they're only
yeah.
Sorry, on the recent results, well, no, it was a bad end to last season, but he did get into the FA Cup final. OK, they were pretty much humiliated in that FA Cup final, but then again, you know, it was Manchester City in their pomp. So there's excuses for that. They haven't been good starters to seasons recently. It is 6 Premier League defeats on the spin, and they've only scored, I think, a couple of goals in those defeats. From people I spoke to who were there yesterday, they thought they probably, it wasn't a 3-1 defeat in terms of performance-wise. I think Hughes missed the sitter to put them ahead. And the feedback, the vibes that I'm getting out of Watford are that Gracia, who signed a new contract last season, there's no chance of him being sacked. Listen, I mean, 3 games into the season, there's normally someone by now who's the spotlight's on, who's been
Steve Bruce will be happy with this story, won't he?
Well, exactly. Maybe until after today, maybe, and he'll probably join him in the same boat. And obviously, what stories have to take into consideration is Watford's recent history and their history of hiring and firing managers. Remember, they're always very good. They have a Christmas drinks do with the media, don't they, in London? It's normally a different manager every year turns up talking about how he's looking forward to a long-term life in London. The next year it's so, hi Marco. But in this instance, we are led to believe that there's going to be no immediate knee-jerk reaction to this poor start. They've had poor starts before. And they've come through, and overall he had a good season last season. He impressed a lot of people. I even sort of heard him linked with bigger jobs, so to speak.
Chelsea being one.
Chelsea being one of them. That's the one I was thinking of. So we'll wait and see. But what's for sure is that while we are led to believe that certainly there's no chance of him being sacked at the moment, a win would come in very handy, very quickly.
And he needs one. They play Newcastle next. I think they've got Arsenal and Manchester City. Realistically, though, in the Premier League era, with the financial effects of relegation, how long does a club at the foot of the table, whether that's Watford, whether that's Newcastle, realistically, before you have to make a cold, hard business decision and say, we're making a change? Palace did it with De Boer after 4 games.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably unusual. History tells us it's sort of November kind of time when if a run like this continues. You want to look at the bigger picture and say, well, Watford finished 11th, reached the FA Cup final. You could explain their slide at the end of last season by the Cup final to some extent. But 6 games in a row is 6 games in a row, and you know that that's not tenable for an extended period of time. The other worry is that they've not had the most difficult set of fixtures to start with as well. You factor that in. Southampton were quite interesting in the last few years because they waited, and it nearly cost them when they got rid of Mark Hughes in February, March time. Brought in Mark Hughes in February, March time, and then they kind of learned from that last year, and when they felt things were sliding under Mark Hughes, they quickly brought in Hassan Huto around, I think it was maybe early December, late November from memory. And I think they felt that they nearly, it was really a bit of luck that they got away with it that season when they waited. I think before a good month or so before the January transfer window is usually the time. So it doesn't feel like it's sort of immediate danger, but clearly another few months with what rides on the Premier League, then you'd have to fear if it continued.
Is there an effect of losing 6-0? Annie mentioned the manner of the defeat, and it was Man City in their pomp in the FA Cup final, but that was such a bruising defeat. It felt like at the time that there's a danger of a hangover. This will go into the new season. Those players will still be affected by the manner of it. It was so savage, the execution of it was so brutal, that what player would not be affected going into a new season? I'm
sure it's hung over Watford. I mean, they must have gone back to pre-season with it, the topic of conversation from day one. Or maybe it would have been in everyone's mind. It was a brutal defeat, that, and I think clearly if you're beaten 6-0 in a cup final, it's humiliating. It's on a worldwide scale, and everyone can see it, and it probably brings doubts about your own performances, the manager's tactics. So I'm sure that they're suffering for that. But it is, like you said, next week at Newcastle, that's the last game before international break. If either of those teams goes into the international break having lost all 4 games, then you do worry. I'd worry more for Grazia than Steve Bruce, actually, because I don't see Mike Ashley as a guy that sacks managers. I think if Newcastle lose at Tottenham today and lose at home to Watford next week, there'll be an awful lot of noise. But Mike Ashley's so stubborn and so determined to do his own thing. I think Steve Bruce will survive, and given the chances to go through it. Javi Grazia, despite being told that he's safe for now, I just think that would be, losing to Newcastle would be pretty tough, especially with, like I said, Watford's track record of, and they're also quite smart, Watford, in terms of identifying coaches anyway coming through, and they're quite an attractive proposition. They're a club that, they're a London club, they class themselves as a London club, so it's an attractive proposition to coaches, and if somebody's available that they think can do a job, I think Grazia might be vulnerable. Yeah,
sure. What about Steve Bruce? I'm always fascinated to read Craig Hope's views on Newcastle United, because he talks this morning, Craig, in his piece, says, been suggested that Steve Bruce getting a rough ride, and the argument that Craig makes this morning is, Steve, you've pretty much brought most of this on yourself. Is that a fair reflection?
Well, I've read Craig's piece earlier this morning, and it goes through the things that he says Steve Bruce, has to answer in the first 2 games. The issue with the substitution, the way Newcastle didn't look as though, they tried overly hard. Well, they didn't try maybe as hard as they could at Norwich. And these are the things that Steve Bruce has to address. Whether it be 1 game, 2 games, 10 games, 12 games, that is the nature of the Premier League. The nature of football is that you're beaten, and you have to come up with answers as to why you were beaten. And Steve Bruce is no different. And the interesting thing I thought about this week was Steve Bruce reacting to the
warm-up.
Yeah, it was that one, and the criticism from Michael Chopra about who claimed that some of the players didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. And Steve Bruce basically rose to the bait. He took the bait. And he shouldn't really have, if he thought they weren't worthy of comments, then he should not have commented on it, And he already looks as though he has a sort of siege mentality, and there's only been 2 games. I mean, there was. I just think that when at the start, that little the thing on social media when they won the friendly and he said, "Come on, let's go," basically saying this might be as good as it gets. Well, that was funny. But it also betrayed a sense that he knows that, well, I'm going to get stick here from day one. Well, you are, because, you're in a club where actually, the owner isn't liked by the fans, so the overall mood is not great. So there's going to be a negativity. Now, it's up to you to try and lift that negativity through performances on the pitch. And the first 2 performances have not lifted that negativity. So he has to take responsibility for that.
What staggered me was the comments about the warm-up as well. When he talked last week about the players, and if they have a bad warm-up, well, that's just one of those things. But if you're a professional athlete and you're playing for Newcastle United at the highest level in the Premier League, you've got responsibility, haven't you, to warm up properly?
You'd think that would just be a given. That would.
But you have a response, whether you like doing a warm up or not. And I guess most players don't particularly enjoy it. But those are the methods that are required to enable you to perform at the highest level when the whistle goes. Yeah,
you would think that's very basic. My concern with from the moment he was appointed, a bit like when Alex McLeish when he went into Villa. You just feel like the mood around the appointment, and very, very difficult to turn that round. And obviously the only way to do that is through results. And compound that with the bad start, I just feel like it's going to be a bit like when Sam Allardyce was at Newcastle as well. When that mood sets in at a club around a manager, and it feels like it's almost got to that point with Steve Bruce in terms of the fans' reaction to his appointment in the first place. It's quite rare that you see. Craig does say in this piece that it's a myth that supporters have already turned on Steve Bruce. That I don't think there's a sort of revolt, but it's a sort of it's a kind of lack of enthusiasm, a sort of negativity.
If I recall, Ash, what he actually says is that it's more a sense of apathy rather than animosity about the whole thing. Yeah. Well, he's got a big apathy that's been bred by disillusionment with the ownership. Yeah, of course. OK, don't forget you can download the podcast from all the usual places. You can catch up with the show. It's also on demand. We're back next week, same time, same place at 10 o'clock. We'll see you then. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Sky Sports Premier League. Feel it all.